My name is Kevin Sutherland. I'm here to talk to you today about procurement, contracting. I know Agilists love to participate and be engaged, so I wanted to start with just a real quick participation item. If everybody could think about the first thing that comes to mind when you think of procurement or contracting, put that in your mind. Does anybody want to share what entered your brain when I asked you to think about contracting or procurement? Held hostage. How long will this take? Takes a long time. Make it stop. Too many. Change requests. Anything else that bounced into people's heads? Yeah. This is what I used to think. Not my problem. Not my problem. Oh, we'll get to that. Revolving door. MSAs, legal, collaboration, that's a new one. Okay. Yeah. Red lines. Infinite time and materials. Last minute negotiations. So a lot of the things I'm hearing indicate that when we think of procurement, we think of something that is not agile. And so, as Agilists, maybe we just shouldn't do procurement. But there are some organizations where they don't really have this choice. They don't have everything in-house and they need to go to external vendors, and it's not really an option. So if if procurement's not agile and we don't always have a choice, the best we can do is move as far to the left as possible on that Agile manifesto spectrum of customer collaboration over contract negotiation. A little bit about me before we jump in. Is this thing working now? Yeah, it is. Great. When it comes to things outside of work, I like to think of myself as a creator, a builder, someone who likes to make things. My wife would maybe characterize me a little bit differently. She would say that I'm an adult child with access to power tools, is probably how she would describe it. And either way, what that translates to when we had smaller kids was building really cool stuff in the yard. So we made rope swings and zip lines and big swings we could push the kids on. I tied bungee cords like 40 feet in the air, made like a bungee jump, sewed a harness so they could jump in it. We had built two tree houses with like a sky bridge in between. In the winter, we made igloos and skating rinks. And one year, I bolted a bunch of wood onto my deck and made a luge that I could jump off, and then hit like an ice wall at the bottom, and it would curve you around and take you to the bottom of the steps. You could climb up and go down again. It was awesome. But the tricky part about having little kids is that eventually they grow into teenagers, which is what I have now, which means I'm less and less cool every day, so we don't do any of this fun stuff. And you may experience this if you have teenagers. They start getting better than me at things, right? My daughter, I used to play her left-handed in ping pong, and I'd be like, "You're so terrible, I can beat you left-handed," right? And somehow she got motivated to get better, and then she started beating me left-handed, and then I started playing right-handed. She started beating me right-handed. My son is a competitive gymnast, so he's been better than me at gymnastics since he was probably like a baby, I guess. But now he does better than me at things like social media. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm out there posting really fascinating stuff about Agile, about procurement. I've got thousands of followers, right? Maybe at least 1,000. And I put something up there, and I get max like 50 people who are like, "Yeah, you dropped some knowledge that I really appreciated there. Thank you so much, Kevin." My kid, he's got like 3 friends on Instagram. He puts up a rings video, 1,000 likes in like a day. And I'm like, "How are you better than me at work? How's that happen?" And my son Ethan he's kind of got this dry, sarcastic humor about him, which is he's really pretty funny. I was amused in this situation because he turned to me and he was like, "Well, Dad, I guess you're just not that agile." And he's probably right. When it comes to work, I have spent the last 2.5 decades as I would consider a system integration delivery practitioner role. The first half of that time working for Accenture, so large vendor, large contracts, large system implementations, large waterfalls. For the second half of that time, working more on the client side, so supporting customers in navigating contracts that with vendors inflicting upon them system implementations. And more recently, I've started my own company with strategic work, helping customers navigate these environments. And the crazy thing is, in all of these 2.5 decades, I have been part of teams that have delivered many large system implementation contracts, but I have not experienced a single instance of delivering one where it was considered a success by the people that needed to use it or had to benefit by it, or even really the initial intent of the contract. And don't get me wrong, I am extremely proud of the work that I've done. I've worked with some extremely smart teams, way smarter than me, extremely dedicated to delivering value in our work, which often meant we'd work 40 hours a week to meet our contractual obligation, and then another 40 hours a week to make sure that the systems made sense to people, and that clearly wasn't enough. We'd work all-nighters pulling these things and creating feats of engineering to take these systems live. And when we got them into production, we would celebrate like we put a person on the moon, but then we'd have to walk in and see people struggle with the results of what we delivered the next day. And actually, true story, I was doing implementation support at one of our customers and showed up at the office to find the staff outside picketing us. They had gone to the trouble of making T-shirts. They had our system was in the middle with like one of those Ghostbuster like red slashes through it. They were marching with signs like "We hate your system. We won't use it," like that kind of thing. Just imagine how much you have to hate a piece of software to picket the people that were coming there to help you use that software. You have to really hate it. And you all will be, I assume, extremely shocked to find out that it didn't really help to explain to them we'd met all the contractual requirements and delivered all of the deliverables. Right? I was shocked as well. And it's examples like that and other experiences throughout my career that have brought me to where I'm standing today, speaking to you about procurement and contracting. I view procurement and contracting to be a fundamental root cause of a lot of misery that exists in the world. I think there are some things that we can do to reduce that misery that are fairly straightforward, at least easy to say, maybe hard to do. I believe that the Agile community has a lot to offer this space, and I believe there's been very little intersection, much due to Mauricio's comment earlier, perhaps. And I'd like to change that as much as possible. To go in a little more detail about the type of work I'm talking about when I'm speaking on procurement, I'm referring to the procurement of transformational change. There are plenty of types of work out there where the traditional methods that we currently use today for procurement work perfectly fine. As an example, I have a buddy named Chad back in Iowa. Chad pours concrete for a living. He has a company called the Concrete Company. He has very literal names. He actually owns another company called the Snow Company that plows snow. So he's keeping that trend going. And actually, to think about it, I probably shouldn't poke fun at Chad. One, he's a really big dude and could just squash me. And secondly, I use the exact same approach when I named my company. I do system integration delivery work. And I named my company SI Delivery Consulting, which is just the worst name. And we actually have a current client right now. They called us SI Delivery Consulting for like 3 weeks before I had the heart to be like, it's actually system integration delivery. Anyway, just call us SI Delivery Consulting. It's fine. And actually, that reminds me, I brought gift cards to give out today. So there's money to be distributed. One of the things that I have is a $100 gift card for giving me a better name for my company. I will be posting a survey at the end, so anyone that fills that out, I'll be and puts their contact information in there. Possible winnings, I'll let you know tomorrow on that one. So where was I? My buddy Chad. Chad responds to several procurements every year from cities looking to improve their roads, so potholes, fix intersections, things like that. These are very clearly defined with locations, dimensions, traffic abatement requirements, the times of work that are possible, the inspections and quality that's needed. And Chad, with his experience doing this work, can very easily come up with an estimate within a very close range or margin of error for doing the work. And the selection process is fairly simple. The people evaluating these bids look at everybody that say they're going to meet the requirements, and they pick the lowest bid that they get. And as a taxpayer, I can have confidence that when Chad wins one of these bids, I will be getting the best value for my money. And for the Cynefin fans out there, the reason this works so well is because this type of work falls into the known quadrant. It's very clear, it's understood, it's predictable. There might be a few known unknowns that are involved, so maybe a storm comes through and causes some extra cost or some delays, but those can be handled through contingencies in the contract. If X happens, then Y additional compensation based on Z matrix of stuff we know very well. Where this approach doesn't work very well is when we apply it to the procurement of transformational change, where work resides in the unknown and chaotic quadrants of Cynefin. It's not clear, it's not understood, it's not predictable. When we take an action, the result of that action might be that we find out we didn't understand anything well enough and we need to change everything we thought about the situation to move forward. So doesn't work in that situation, yet we continue to apply the processes we use to fix roads, to the procurement methods for applying transformational change. And I'll be breaking this into 3 categories, which you see on the screen here. So be thinking about the work that you do and how it applies to these categories, because I'll be asking you some questions about this in a second. But strategic work, say I'm a company and I want to undergo a transformational change, like say I have a mainframe and I want to be in the cloud, or I prioritize things through projects and I want to do it through products. And I don't have the expertise or experience doing this. I might engage with a vendor through a contract to bring in someone that's done this before and help me create a strategy, create a plan, approach, and structure how I'm going to go about undertaking that change. That strategic work could result in one or both of the other 2 categories you see on the screen, delivery or operational work. And I do understand there might be some debate about the necessity of dividing those 2 things and where that dividing line might be. But for the purpose of this presentation, I will say that for procurement, I consider it important. And the way I'm describing the dividing line, operational would be when we have a stable existing product that has a user base, so it's in production, and a stable existing team that maintains that product. If we don't have one or more of those conditions, we're likely doing delivery work. If we're figuring out who our team is, we're probably doing delivery work. If we're working on something that's not in production yet, delivery. That doesn't mean you can't have the same team that could be doing both. It's just a way to separate the type of work. And in procurement, you're usually doing one or the other most of the time. So let's jump into finding out a little bit about everyone in the room. The next thing I'll be talking about is some of the more foundational concepts and setting up some frameworks, some of the more boring stuff, getting into the learning objectives that were in the presentation. So that's something I struggle with, is how to go about presenting this information that didn't just bore the Jesus out of everybody. And what I landed on was taking a page out of Jeff Patton's book. Has anybody seen that, his video, Outputs versus Outcomes and Impacts? A couple people. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend looking it up, Outputs versus Outcomes and Impacts. Check it out, it is awesome. And I will be introducing Kevin from 3 weeks ago to present that content to y'all. So, here you go.
Hey Kevin.
Hello.
Hey everyone. I'll be introducing a few key terms and a framework for Kevin to reference in his remaining presentation. Did you already hype the patent video?
Yep.
Cool. For those who have seen it, this will look a little bit familiar. I'll start by drawing out a few key IT procurement terms. First, there's the scope. Then there's the activities to complete the scope. There's the outputs resulting from those activities. There's the outcomes we hope to achieve through the activities and the outputs. And then there's the organizational impact we hope to experience as a result of the outcomes. Underlying all of this are the compliance requirements that must be followed at all times while delivering the scope. The scope of procurements focused on buying transformational change usually fall into one of 2 high-level categories. 1, the software products to be used and or delivered. And 2, transformation services to be performed. And I believe Kevin has already introduced the 3 categories of activities of these procurements that usually fall into. One being the strategic services to provide IT strategy, planning, road mapping, organizational change consulting, coaching, etc. Second being the delivery services work to build, configure, integrate, convert, change manage, train to a new software solution or other transformational change that's in scope. This activity is usually the most correlated with that software scope item. Third, operational services work to improve ways of working for the maintenance of a current software solution and/or the corresponding business processes. Outputs are the resulting deliverables generated from the strategy, delivery, or operational services work. These could be formal deliverables like plans or reports, or maybe software artifacts like specification documentation, configurations, code, test execution results, and ultimately working software. Outcomes are the near-term results that can be reasonably associated with the scope. These could be things like improved customer satisfaction or increased operational efficiency. Outcomes are ideally measurable using trend lines over time, and these measures can tell us if the transformational changes we introduce are making things better or worse. Impact refers to the reason we're all doing this in the first place. Impacts are often challenging to trace back to a specific scoped activity. Typical desired corporate impacts are things like market share and profit, which often lag behind corresponding outcome improvements. And lastly,
what about nonprofits and governments?
Good question. These impacts are usually even harder to measure and associate to outcomes, things like societal improvement or improved equity for marginalized groups. Lastly, mandatory compliance items, often referred to as governance, regulatory, and compliance, are conditions that must always be met and shouldn't be tailored specifically to different scope or activities. Examples might be items like security, confidentiality, HIPAA, 508 compliance, federal and state regulations, etc. All right, with this model defined, let's take a look at the typical contract structure for the two types of scope we've identified: software licenses scope and services scope. For each,
what if you have both software and services scope?
Yes, interesting that you bring that up. There are some situations in which it makes sense to combine software and services into the same contract, like maybe an outsourcing or managed services contract scenario. But for what you're talking about, contract scope focusing on transformational change, I'd recommend keeping software and services separate from a contractual terms and conditions standpoint. Merging the two is actually a common way to encounter challenges in these situations.
All right, your boss, if people have questions about that, we can talk about it.
Perfect. We'll ignore these scenarios for now and treat software and services separately. For each, I'll cover two elements of a contract: what customers receive from the vendor, the contract obligations, and secondly, how payments to vendors are determined, the payment terms. Starting with software, customers buying software commonly expect their money to buy them access to the software, the ongoing upgrades to ensure the software stays current with compliance rules and keeps pace with changing technology, and then support when they have issues or questions using the software. Payment terms for software are usually dependent upon the level of functionality made available, like number of licensed users, storage and compute actually being used, and/or level of support being provided to the customer. Some software can still be purchased upfront at a single payment, but most vendors have moved to subscription services that are billed based on the monthly use and service levels. And most are fairly simple these days. If you want to keep using it, you keep paying the subscription cost. If you stop paying, you stop using the software. A primary challenge customers encounter with software products is that we can't be certain it's the perfect solution to meet our needs up front. And once we've done the work to configure and integrate the product into our environment, the switching costs can be very high, and we're locked in. It's also common to see clients implementing customizations, which can limit the benefits of upgrades and support, and we're stuck, continuing to pay for something that meets our needs less and less as the world continues to change. When it comes to services, the obligation of the contract is usually defined by the activities to be performed or the outputs to be delivered. Below are a few examples of each of the three categories we've mentioned. A strategic contract obligation could include the assessment of a current state environment, recommendations for change, and possibly a strategy and plan for implementing the recommendations. A delivery contract obligation could specify the implementation and configuration of a purchased software product, or possibly the custom build of a software product. An operational contract obligation could include a team coach role that works with existing teams to facilitate collaboration and continuous improvement, or potentially a fully functioning dev team that can continually develop and deploy items from a product backlog. There are a few common contractual methods for determining how and when to pay vendors for services work. Time and materials, where customers pay for the actual hours or days worked based on an hourly or daily rate and any expenses incurred. This is typically mostly tied to activities. Deliverables based, a contract is signed upfront for a specified set of deliverables and payment is made when those deliverables are approved by the customer. Iteration based, agreement is reached to pay a fixed amount by iteration and the team delivers based on the scope determined as part of an ongoing planning process. There are a few challenges on the services side as well, which often come down to the question of performance management. Many buyers want to be sure they are getting what they pay for and believe this should be spelled out upfront in requirements and clear deliverables. But I don't need to tell this group the problems associated with putting solution details into a contract upfront when we know the least amount of information. If we don't want to decide the details upfront, time and materials seems like it might make the most sense. But many buyers steer clear of this option because it puts the accountability for results on the buyer. And one of the reasons for procuring a vendor may be to outsource some of that accountability. Some vendors don't like it because it can create a focus on bill rate instead of value. So you'd think an iteration-based model would be the best of both worlds. Pay for clear deliverables that are defined just in time. It definitely sounds great, but can result in frustration if this turns every iteration into a contract negotiation discussion. But enough background from me. Kevin, I'll turn it back over to you to cover some root cause issues and give us ideas to avoid some of these challenges.
All right, so hopefully that wasn't too boring. I didn't see too many people nodding off in the back, so that's good. Note that I will not be covering everything that boring Kevin just went through in his presentation. I'll be focusing the remainder of what I'm here talking about mostly on this services side of the screen and using that framework that he laid out to talk more. And what I'll mainly be doing is diving deep in on two fundamental shifts in how we structure procurements that I believe can drastically reduce that misery I talked about earlier. So, groundbreaking stuff, mind-blowing content coming your way. I hope you're ready for your minds to be blown as we move into this next segment, and I'll start talking about the first one. So, hope you're prepared for this and can manage it. The first shift in how we structure our procurements that I have to propose to everyone that's super groundbreaking is to focus on outcomes. Okay, maybe that's not groundbreaking, and you may have heard this before, and I hear this a lot, right? That's okay, no worries. And, you know, it's something that's very easy to say, and it's also something that's very, very hard to do, especially in a contracting situation. What we see in the world mostly is what Kevin just talked through is contracts that are comprised primarily of scope activities and deliverables and rarely tied to why we're doing the work in the first place, the results that we want to achieve out of that contract. And maybe that's because this is hard to do. So if we apply this to the scenario I talked about with my buddy Chad earlier, this would be like if a city would release a solicitation and said, we'd like everyone to give us bids for improving driver satisfaction on the roads. And we'll pay you based on how happy people are after you've done the work and that they're driving on the roads. That sounds completely insane. And so this process sometimes sounds completely insane, even to people when we're talking in that unknown quadrant where it might make more sense to do it. And people have a hard time adopting this type of mindset. I have a hard time adopting this mindset, and I'm here talking to you about it. There's one technique that I can share with you that I have used that's helped to focus on outcomes and moving more in that direction. And I refer to it as an outcomes map. It's fairly straightforward. Basically start at the right side of this framework and work your way back to the left. So start with that impact. Define what it is that the reason for doing the work in the first place, and then start moving back to the left, get to the outcomes, identify achievable outcomes that you can hopefully measure, and validate those with the stakeholders that are involved, the sponsors that are funding the work or making decisions about the contract. Make sure that they would say, yep, those are the outcomes that I want achieved through this contract. And if possible, and this isn't always possible, try to baseline how well the organization currently does with respect to those outcomes. This is a great way to figure out if what types of activities, scope, and deliverables might make sense to improve them as well, which is that third step. Start tracing all of this together, identify the things that would improve the outcomes, the activities that could move that forward, the outputs that could help, and link them to the outcomes that you'd like to achieve. Start experimenting, try one, measure it. Does it improve the outcome? If not, pivot and make new activities and things and deliverables, and make that flexible in your contracts as much as possible to really keep the outcomes consistent and shift and change on the other three parts of this framework. So it sounds really easy, but I know what you're thinking, especially the people that were in the front of the room with the delivery stickies on their name tags. You're thinking, this is all great, Kevin, but I do the delivery. It's the people that write the contracts that, I'm glad that you're setting this up for them so you can tell them what to do. I'm happy for you, but I don't know how this helps me because I just received the results of that. And I totally get it. That completely makes sense. I hear you. But if I may, I'd like to tell a story about a time where I was in your shoes and I was doing delivery work in that delivery role and was able to use the outcomes map to improve the overall outcomes of the effort. And this goes back to a time that people probably remember, the COVID-19 pandemic. I was working in a state Medicaid agency at the time, and when the pandemic hit, the federal government came out and said, we need to stop Medicaid renewals. We're worried about people losing their coverage at this very terrible time in our nation's history. We had ultra-liberal, far left-wing Trump in office, and he was most concerned about the disadvantaged, vulnerable, poor people, and wanted to make sure. I'm clearly not serious about that. I don't know how this rule came down, but anyway, we stopped all the Medicaid renewals. So Medicaid enrollment's going up, cost is going up. Hard-right conservative Biden comes in, he sees this extra cost, we're getting to the end of the pandemic, and he says, we need to get these moochers off, all right, get it going. So another mandate comes down that says, all right, states, we know we told you to stop doing Medicaid renewals, and you have your lowest staff levels and highest Medicaid enrollments in all time. We need you to just go ahead and renew everybody right now. Is that cool? And states were freaking out about this, as you might imagine. And I wasn't in the room where it happened, where the contract discussions were going on, but I can imagine it when something like a vendor saw that the state was really struggling and was worried about this situation and came to our leadership and said, I've got a master contract. All you got to do is buy my predictive analytics tool. We'll create a staff model for the future. All your problems are solved. And leadership said, ooh, thank you, vendor. This is perfect. Hey, delivery Kevin, come over here. You're going to sign a contract with this vendor. All we need you to do is install their tool, configure it, and work with our data team to map all the data in and problem solve. Please go ahead and execute that for us. And I said, okay, that sounds great. A couple questions that I have, and I've gotten better at a couple questions. I used to, 5 years ago, I probably would have sent the outcomes impact map and been like, please fill out the outcomes and impact in squares and send it back. I've come to a couple of these conferences and learned that a better technique might be to ask questions that are open-ended, like, what are you most worried about? What does success look like? Fast forward a little bit into the future and tell me, paint a picture of how things are going if this went well. And it turns out there was really one thing that they were most concerned about, and that was not being on the front page of the paper. This is a politically charged environment. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You disenroll the wrong person, you got a sob story on the front of the paper. You keep the wrong person on longer, you got a waste story on the front of the paper. You don't do anything, you got an incompetence story on the front of the paper. And these folks, there's people think of public servants and they have this image of someone that's incompetent and lazy just sitting around. That has not been my experience. These are very hardworking, highly skilled people that really care. And the last thing they need is someone telling them that they're doing a terrible job and publishing that in the media. So this is what they were primarily worried about, and had two outcomes that they thought would be effective at achieving that impact. The first one being able to confidently and clearly be able to respond and understand what is happening as the renewals are taking place. If something that is out of order, they can jump on it immediately and explain it and be clear about it with the public and what's going on. The second being that they have their staff management and processing renewals in an effective manner. So with that clarity, I took that back to the team and the vendor, and there were a couple issues. One, the contract did not include that first outcome in its scope, so that was completely out of the scope of what was considered in that $1.5 million contract that we signed. And two, the tool was meant to achieve the second outcome, but we had plenty of data gaps where, in order to actually feed the tool what it was needed to truly achieve the outcome, we would have had to have staff go and collect the data, tag it and bag it, put it into another tool that we'd have to build, map it to this new predictive analytics modeling tool, plus we didn't have people to use it. So there were some issues, let's say that. So again, I can't claim to be in the room for how this went down, but a few things happened, and I'm gonna guess how this went. The vendor came into the leadership team and said, hey, Kevin over here is really being a beehole and is asking us to deliver actual results. That triples our price. So if you want us to do this, we still can. And leadership was like, yeah, maybe that's really annoying. I don't know. But you had the managers in the room who were thinking to themselves, hey, the leadership's thinking about paying these guys $4.5 million to do our jobs. Maybe we should step up and take ownership of this. And they did. They said, we're going to own this. This is what we do. And they did. I mean, that's what they do. They manage the staff. They make sure that the right people in the right places, the right renewals at the right time, and they handled it. And the data team was looking at the incomes map saying, this is what you care about? Like, usually we just get cryptic requirements like data field mappings in them. Like, we totally know how to do this. This is easy. We will create something. And they delivered a Power BI dashboard with drill down capability that showed everything anyone would need to know about renewals. Both of these things were $0 extra dollars. I was at a conference 6 months later, and someone that was at the conference found out, this is like I forget what it was for, but it was in DC, it was a federal thing, and somebody found out where I was working and literally ran up and was shaking me to tell me how amazing our dashboards were, that they use them all the time, they show them to other states, and they made it's a huge part of their job, or part of improving the way they do the work is using the content that these people had created. And I was like, well, I spent about a little over an hour on that. Let me take that back and pass that on to the team of public servants who delivered that work, which was one of the prouder moments of my career, being able to go back to a group of people that rarely receives recognition to let them know that the work that they were doing was making an impact nationally, across the country. That was pretty cool. Thank you, Outcomes Map. So that is one example of the outcomes map being used in a situation where I had no control over the contract terms themselves. So moving on, the second fundamental shift in how we structure our procurements that I believe will reduce misery in our world is similar to the outcomes item in that it's easy to talk about, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. And that's vertical slicing across an organization from strategic all the way to delivery. I've talked about this before. If you saw me talk last year, Agile 2023, I presented on strategic delivery from breaking down work from strategic to delivery work. When I see most content out there that talks about this concept of vertical slicing, what I see falls mostly into this operational layer of this picture, where we're talking about user story slicing, or doing A/B experiments, or customer segmentation and experimentation, mostly things that would need an existing product and an existing team block. When we don't have an existing product and an existing team, those techniques are much more difficult to apply. And so what we need is a little bit more in terms of instruction on how we vertically slice, which I've thrown a couple examples from being able to take a specific outcome, do as small as possible vertically through the whole organization so we can get to that experimental mode. And we actually see examples of this out in the world today that aren't happening in procurement. For example, I believe there's only one place in the world right now where you can go on your phone, it's the phone, and order up a car that comes and picks you up with no driver in it and takes you wherever you want to go within a very small, geographical, vertically sliced segment. And further, there's probably only a few people that have been invited in to do these functions that are very favorable to autonomous vehicles and are participating in that tiny, tiny slice of the world. Below that, we have people that are learning thousands of things a day, using that vertical slice, running experiments, and figuring out what needs to happen in order to expand to the next vertical slice, and the next one, and the next one. And at some point, we'll hit a stage in which all of the learning has exceeded the threshold of block of constraints, and we'll see exponential growth and autonomous vehicles everywhere. I don't know when that'll be, but it'll happen when vertical slice expansion starts to be exponential. A place where I see in the world this doesn't happen very often, which is actually somewhat surprising to me, is in Agile transformations. It's very common for me to hear things like, we need to get the entire executive team on board with this major change we're applying to the organization to make sure they can support it. Or we need the middle's frozen, we need to unfreeze the frozen middle. And we're going to do product academy and training sessions so they can support the change of the teams. Or we need Scrum training for all our teams, and DevOps and katas and dojos to make sure they're trained on new ways of working. Can you get that change that you're trying to apply to the organization to work for one team? And we get it to work for one manager, and we get it to work for one leader. If we can't, there's not much use in trying to do it all at the time. And really all that's needed is everybody agreeing, we're going to do an experiment, everybody else keep doing what you're doing, it's working really great, right? So keep doing that, and we're gonna show you social proof when we see something that works, and then expand. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, all right, Kevin, this is great for the customers that structure these agreements, but I'm a poor vendor that receives the contract from the customer, and I don't have a ton of control over that, right? So I was in a session with Chris Merman earlier today. I don't know if anyone was in there, but he went through some of the deliverables as a vendor that he received, and one of them was that he launched 45 release trains, right? So you go ahead and do that, vendor, no problem, right? I don't have control over this, and that's very true, great point, but if I may, I'd like to tell a story about when I was a vendor and was responding to a customer and applied the vertical slicing techniques as well as outcome mapping to improve things. And this story actually starts with Bob Galen. Does anybody know Bob? You know the Moosers's here. Bob, there it is. Bob is one of my mentors and Agile folks I look up to, a pillar in the community. He started and often facilitates a discussion group called the Agile Mooser. And in that discussion group, people from all over the world twice a week meet and talk about challenges they're having, and we all work together to give each other ideas and solve those challenges. And as I was building my company and working on responding to customer RFPs, it occurred to me that we're really good at solving each other's challenges, but how great would it be if we banded together and solved a customer challenge together? And I threw that out in the Mooser, and I had 3 people that responded saying, heck yeah, we love that SI Delivery Consulting brand. We really want to be a part of that thing. I'm sure it was the name that did it. So. And so we got a group together. Gary's actually one of the people on the team, so if you want to fact check anything I'm saying, Gary's right here to ask him. But basically, a state was looking for to improve their job application process, as well as shift from a project to a product model. And because this was a government scenario, it was fixed bid, so a response with a single price to a list of deliverables. Those deliverables being, come do some analysis and discovery on what our product looks like in our team. That's one milestone. Deliverable number 2, figure out all the customer mapping and personas and do a bunch of customer engagement to identify all the things that need to change about our product. And then deliverable 3, give us the roadmap, the backlog, and the strategy for continuing to improve our job application process. And I looked at this, and it really felt like what they were going for was that operational scope category. Most of these things seem like items that will be delivered with the existing team to fix the existing product and move it forward. And so I looked at the 2 things that I've been telling you guys about: focus on outcomes, vertical slicing, and try to apply those to the response. And what I responded with was, all right, let's start with those 2 things. Let's identify what your outcomes are, which wasn't part of the scope they asked for. So this is new scope I added to the agreement. And in addition to that, let's work together to identify a single tiny vertical slice that goes through everything that this job process touches. Like maybe just a single agency in the state that uses it, or maybe just one job role. And then let's complete all the deliverables just for that slice in this contract and focus really narrowly on that work. And then we'll throw in an additional scope that wasn't asked for. We'll go and execute. Once we've got all the deliverables completed, we've got your operational team, we've got all the research we've done, let's go run one sample through and see if the suggestions we've made actually work or they don't, and we need to go back to the drawing board. And we put this in as a bid, which, as you may notice, it does indicate we're not doing a lot of the things that they asked, but it does add a couple of new things. And it turns out that this is a very forward-thinking group that was doing this review, and the price was right. My approach for that, I didn't know what to do, so it wasn't a Chad situation where I could get a clear price on this. I took the list of deliverables and took a guess on what it would take to do all that work, and then just cut it in half. I'm just going to trust that this vertical slicing outcome stuff works, so we'll put it in a half price bid and see how it goes. So the price was good, the group liked the approach, and they brought us in. So the first thing we did was have that first conversation with the customer. And because in state procurement, this might be different in other areas. You really can't have discussions. It's iron curtain, no conversation. So we sat down with the stakeholders and brought from what we saw in the solicitation the outcomes that we thought they were interested in. So project to product, we're like, okay, you are looking for improved delivery experience and a team that's working in a more effective way, improve the job application experience, you'd like to get the customer's experience to be better and have that translate to better equity, improved quality of staff that are being hired. And they were like, yeah, we like all that stuff, but actually, we really have a governor's order where the governor's office got wind that no one likes the careers website, and they just want us to come. We need to come in front of them and present them a strategy for what we're going to do with it. All that other stuff is great, but we really like you to just make sure everybody's aligned on how we address this and give us the presentation. So I'm a little worried because that wasn't what we proposed, and it wasn't the vertical slicing, and it wasn't, and I'm still at risk for all the deliverables because I signed on for them with the contract. But trust the process, and we said, okay, we're going to shift the outcomes map, and we're going to put that job, the governor's office presentation at the far right, and the outcome that you want of this understanding and alignment around an approach for addressing your careers website, with no idea what we're going to do in the middle for those deliverables. But we're going to start with a discovery process where we come in and we understand what's going on to get there. And so we started in 3 weeks of discovery and essentially learned things that they knew before they brought us in, which was fun. But I think that's really what they were looking for, is someone that could provide a data-driven analysis to confirm the things they thought so they could present it to the governor's office. Well, we essentially discovered that really no one was enjoying the customer or the job application site. From a technology standpoint, the team was great, but the product had been customized to the extent that the team only had time to make upgrades and product patches, so that the velocity of the team was essentially zero. any customer engagement backlog that we created wouldn't have gone anywhere because they had no capacity for it. And from an outcome standpoint, we measured and baselined their data, and the average processing time was much longer than you'd expect, between 90 and 120 days, much longer than typical average processing times for hiring. But we were able to come to them and say, it's been 3 weeks. I think we've got enough information to give you everything you need for your governor's office presentation. And that recommendation is, instead of operations, what we need is a delivery approach where we replace that product with something different. We apply some organizational change to it, and we included in the strategy a vertical slicing element to start with a pilot, test out different products, try that for only one agency, and then expand vertically as we go through it. So we introduced in the strategy the vertical slicing and outcomes focus to the work. And we essentially agreed with them that because we have everything, we could really just work in more of a time and materials way and shift to focusing on what they truly needed, and we could map back to the deliverables. And the end result was basically signing on with them for another year, and we're there not just supporting the job application process, but also additional areas of their technology and things that are related. So, great result out of that, focusing on outcome with vertical slicing. All right, just to summarize everything we've been talking about in the last 30 minutes or so, the two things that I'm primarily bringing to the table for this group are focusing on outcomes, using that outcomes map, and vertically slicing our work, doing as small as possible with a focus on that outcome to deliver it. And we got all the stuff typed in. If you guys still have your Mentee app on your phone, the last thing we can do is go back to those challenges that you put on the board and think about these two suggestions and how much you think they help.